The lock on my bedroom door was new. My daughter had laughed when she saw it, a small, polite laugh, the kind that isn't really a laugh at all. "You don't need that, Mom. This is your home too." But she didn't take the lock off. She just stopped meeting my eyes at breakfast. That was 3 months before I found out what she had been doing in the room while I slept. I want to tell this from the beginning, because the beginning matters. If I start with the confrontation, with the way her face went white under the kitchen light, you'll miss the part that made it possible, the part where I stopped being afraid of what I might find and decided to go looking anyway. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 38 years old, sharp-eyed and capable, the kind of woman who alphabetizes her spice rack and never misses a deadline. I was proud of that. I raised her alone after her father left when she was 11, working double shifts at the hospital laundry so she could take piano lessons and go to the school where the science lab had actual microscopes. I wanted better for her. For a long time, I believed I had given it to her. When her husband, my son-in-law, moved out last February and the divorce papers arrived before the weather had even turned warm, I didn't hesitate. She called me on a Tuesday night, voice tight and controlled the way she got when she was trying not to cry, and said she didn't know how she was going to manage the mortgage alone. I had a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. Nothing fancy, but mine, paid off. I'd been retired 3 years by then, living on Social Security and the small pension from my 31 years as a hospital administrator. It wasn't a fortune, but it was stable. It was enough. I told her I'd be there by the weekend. I want to be clear about something, because I know some people will wonder why I didn't just let her move in with me, or why I gave up my apartment at all. The truth is I had a scare the previous autumn, a dizzy spell that turned into a fall, that turned into a scan, that turned into a conversation with my doctor about my heart that I'd rather not repeat. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that required surgery or daily medication beyond what I already took. But I was 63 years old, and I had spent a week in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what it would mean to be alone. Renee was my only child. She had the bigger space, the spare room, the neighborhood with the good pharmacy 2 blocks away. It made sense. I told myself it made sense. She helped me carry boxes up the stairs. My son-in-law's things were already gone from the master bedroom, the walls still faintly outlined with the ghost rectangles where his framed concert posters had hung. Renee's daughter, my granddaughter, had just turned 8, and she pressed her face into my stomach at the door and said, "Grandma, your room smells like flowers." And I thought, this will be all right. This will be fine. The first month was fine. Better than fine. I cooked on weeknights when Renee worked late. I walked my granddaughter to the school bus and waited for her in the afternoons. I paid half the groceries and slipped money toward the electric bill without being asked. I didn't snoop, didn't rearrange, didn't offer opinions about the clutter on the kitchen counter or the fact that Renee let the recycling pile up for 2 weeks at a time. I was a guest, I told myself. I was here to help, not to take over. But by the second month, I started noticing things. The first was small. My prescription bottles, I take a blood thinner and a low-dose cholesterol medication. Nothing unusual began appearing on the wrong shelf in the bathroom cabinet. I am organized about my medications. 31 years in hospital administration will do that to a person. I keep the blood thinner on the left, the other on the right, a habit so old it's muscle memory. One morning, I reached for the left bottle and picked up the right one. I switched them back and didn't say anything. It happened again the following week. Then a third time, I started counting my pills. The second thing was money. I kept a small amount of cash in the zippered interior pocket of my everyday purse, the one that hung on the hook behind my bedroom door. $40 or $60, never more, enough for the farmer's market on Saturday or a tip at the salon. The amounts started coming up short. Not dramatically $10 here, 15 there, the kind of shortfall you could easily blame on a miscounted bill or a forgotten purchase. I wrote down every transaction in the Notes app on my phone. The math didn't lie. The third thing was my jewelry box. My mother had given me a small gold brooch the Christmas before she passed, shaped like a sprig of holly, the leaves set with tiny green chips that weren't emeralds but might as well have been to me. I wore it every year on Christmas morning without fail. In March, I opened the jewelry box to find it missing. I looked in every reasonable place. I asked Renee, carefully, if she'd borrowed it or seen it somewhere. She frowned and said she hadn't touched my jewelry box, then added with that careful gentleness that had started to feel like a warning, "Mom, you've been a little scattered lately. Maybe you just misplaced it." I had not misplaced it. I knew that the same way I knew my name, but I smiled and said, "You're probably right," and went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long while. I thought about my mother. I thought about Renee at 11, standing in the kitchen doorway in her school uniform asking when Dad was coming back. I thought about how much I wanted this to work. And then I opened the drawer of my nightstand, and I took out the small spiral notebook I kept there for grocery lists and phone numbers, and I started a new page. March 19. Blood thinner on wrong shelf again. $15 missing from purse. Holly brooch not in jewelry box. I wrote small. I had a feeling there would be more to write. My neighbor at the old apartment, a retired school teacher named Dot, had stayed in touch. She was the kind of woman who called on a Sunday afternoon just to check in, who sent cards in the actual mail, who had brought a casserole to my hospital room after the dizzy spell without being asked. She was also the kind of woman who told you the truth. When I called her in April and described what had been happening carefully, without accusation, just the facts as I had written them, she was quiet for a moment before she said, "Meredith, I want you to listen to me. You are one of the sharpest people I know. Trust what you're seeing." That was the permission I hadn't realized I needed. I bought a small digital voice recorder at the pharmacy. The kind people use for lectures and meetings, nothing sophisticated. I started leaving it on the windowsill behind the curtain in my room whenever I went out to walk or to the pharmacy or to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I also bought a new lock for my bedroom door, the kind with a key. I told Renee it made me feel safer after my fall. She said, "Of course, Mom, whatever you need." And she smiled the smile that never reached her eyes anymore. And she told her boyfriend, a man I'd met only twice, who always seemed to be leaving just as I was arriving, that she'd get it taken care of. Her boyfriend. I should explain him. His name was Derek. And I want to be careful about Derek, because there was nothing specific I could point to about him that was wrong. He was polite when he spoke to me, called me ma'am, didn't raise his voice. But he was always at the edge of conversations, listening. And twice I had come home earlier than expected to find him in the kitchen going through the mail, not his mail, Renee's mail, with a focus that felt too deliberate for casual tidying. On a Thursday evening, in late April, I left for a walk with the recorder running. I came back 45 minutes later, let myself in through the side door, and went directly to my room without announcing myself. That night, after my granddaughter was asleep, I sat at the small desk by the window with my earbuds in and listened. Renee's voice from the hallway. She keeps her bank statements in the nightstand. The accordion folder. Derek's voice, closer, just outside my door. And the other stuff? The pension paperwork? Renee. She doesn't know I already have copies. From the filing cabinet in the office, back when we moved everything in. A pause. Derek, how much? Renee. After the house, close to 300,000. She won't live forever. I sat very still. The night sounds of the house went on around me, the refrigerator cycling on, a car passing outside, my granddaughter's sound machine running its soft ocean loop through the wall. I rewound and listened again. Then I took my earbuds out and sat in the dark for a long time. I want to tell you that I was surprised. Part of me wants to say it felt like a blow, like the floor shifted, and there was grief in it. Real grief, the kind you feel when something you have been refusing to believe finally refuses to be refused anymore. But underneath the grief was something steadier, because here is what I understood, sitting in that dark room. My daughter was not acting alone, and she had been planning this for longer than one conversation in a hallway. I called Dot the next morning. I told her everything. She asked me one question. "Do you have a lawyer?" I didn't. But I knew how to find one. The attorney I found was a woman named Patricia, recommended by the social worker at the senior center 3 blocks from the house, a place I had started stopping into on Tuesday afternoons under the pretense of the watercolor class they offered. Patricia was direct and unhurried, and she did not look at me with the particular softness some professionals use when speaking to older women. The softness that means they have already decided how much you understand. She looked at me like a person. She took notes. She told me what I needed. I spent the next 3 weeks doing exactly what she said. I retrieved my important documents: Social Security card, pension paperwork, the deed to the apartment I still owned. I had never taken Renee's name off the rental agreement. I still owned the property, just not living in it. My original bank statements from the accordion folder in my nightstand, and moved them, in rotation, to a locked fireproof box that I stored behind the winter coats in the back of the closet. I replaced the originals with neat copies. I opened a new checking account at a bank Renee had no connection to, and had my pension deposited there beginning the first of the following month. I also changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy, a task I had been putting off for years, to my granddaughter's educational trust rather than to Renee directly. I did all of this quietly and at a pace that looked, to anyone watching, like the slow, ordinary movements of an older woman getting through her days. But I wasn't finished. Patricia had advised me that the recorded conversation, while compelling, would be more useful in a civil context than as evidence of intent. What I needed, if it came to that, was proof of what had already been taken: the brooch, the cash, the medication tampering, if I could document it properly. The medication piece was the one I had been circling around because it frightened me most. I couldn't prove a mix-up was intentional based on placement alone, but a pharmacist I spoke with, carefully and hypothetically, explained that there were ways to test whether pills had been switched between bottles. I brought both prescriptions to a different pharmacy, paid out of pocket for a consultation, and described my concern. The pharmacist, a serious, unhurried man who reminded me of my old hospital colleagues, agreed to compare the pills to the manufacturer's specifications. 2 days later, he called me. The pills in my blood thinner bottle were correct. The pills in my cholesterol bottle were not. They were the same shape and color, but a different dosage, higher, not enough to be immediately dangerous, he said carefully, but enough, over time, in combination with my blood thinner, to cause problems. Enough to explain the dizziness I had been experiencing in the mornings, which I had attributed to age. He filed a report with the state pharmacy board. I brought his written summary to Patricia. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she said, "Meredith, I think we're ready." What happened on the night of May 14th began, as many important things do, with a plan. I had made a point, over the previous week, of mentioning casually that I was expecting a check, a small insurance reimbursement. Nothing dramatic. I said it once at dinner and once on the phone while Renee was in the kitchen, and I watched to see if her attention shifted. It did. I also mentioned, just as casually, that I had been keeping the paperwork in the nightstand because I hadn't gotten to the filing yet. Then I took a long Saturday afternoon trip to visit Dot, told both Renee and my granddaughter I'd be back by 7, and came back by 5. I let myself in through the side door again, quietly, and stood in the hallway for a moment. From upstairs, I could hear my granddaughter's television. From the direction of my bedroom, a sound, the soft, deliberate sound of a drawer being opened. I walked upstairs. I stood in the doorway of my own room. Renee was standing at my nightstand, with the accordion folder in her hands, rifling through it. Her back was to me. She hadn't heard me come in. I said, "Looking for something?" She spun around. The folder spilled the copies I had left there, carefully arranged to look like originals, fluttering to the floor. Her face did something complicated that moved through surprise, and then tried to land on indignation. "Mom, I was looking for the insurance card. For the pharmacy. I didn't want to bother you." I looked at the folder on the floor. I looked at her. "The insurance cards are in the kitchen drawer," I said. They've been in the kitchen drawer since February. She bent to pick up the papers, buying herself a moment. When she straightened, she had rearranged her expression into something careful and concerned. You've been so forgetful lately. I worry about you. I thought maybe… Renee, I said. She stopped. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I wasn't angry. I want to say that clearly I had expected to feel something hot and large when this moment came, but what I actually felt was a strange, settled calm, the calm of a person who has known a thing for a long time and is finally allowed to say it out loud. I'm going to show you something, I said, and I want you to hear me all the way through before you say anything. I reached under the mattress, not the nightstand, not where she had been looking, and pulled out the folder Patricia had helped me prepare. I set it on the bed between us. I showed her the pharmacist's written summary first. I watched her face. She started to speak, and I held up one hand, not harshly. And she stopped. I showed her the cash records. Every date, every amount, cross-referenced with the entry log I had kept in the Notes app on my phone. I showed her the photograph Dot had taken the previous Saturday, from the car, of Renee's boyfriend Derek leaving the records office downtown carrying a manila envelope. Patricia had told me what to look for. A financial power of attorney inquiry, submitted without my knowledge or signature, had been started and then withdrawn 2 weeks earlier when something, possibly the new bank account, possibly the changed beneficiary, possibly something else entirely had apparently signaled that the plan was further along than they thought. And then I placed on the bed, flat, the printed transcript of the recording from my room. Not the full conversation, just the relevant 45 seconds. Renee's voice, Derek's voice. The number 300,000, sitting on the page like a fact. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. She's an 8-year-old girl, I said finally. My voice was even. I had practiced this part, not because I was performing it, but because I needed to say it correctly. Whatever you decided to do with me, she has to grow up knowing what her mother is. You have done this to her too. Renee said nothing. Her eyes had gone somewhere inward. I stood and picked up the folder. I have spoken with an attorney. I want you to understand that I am not doing this to punish you. But I will not stay in this house. And I will not pretend that I don't know what I know. Derek's name appeared in a cease and desist letter Patricia had prepared. I left a copy on the kitchen counter on my way out. I had already arranged 3 days earlier to move back into my apartment. My tenants had given notice in April, and the unit had been sitting empty for 2 weeks, as if it had been waiting. Dot helped me carry the boxes. The drive back to my old neighborhood took 20 minutes. When I pulled into my parking spot and cut the engine, I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. The building looked the same. The window boxes on the second floor still had their plastic ferns. The pharmacist 2 blocks over had a handwritten sign in the window advertising flu shots. I had missed this street without fully knowing it. I carried the first box up myself. The apartment smelled a little like closed windows and stale air, the honest smell of a space waiting to be lived in again. I set the box on the kitchen table and opened the window over the sink. The sound of the street came in a bus, a dog, someone's radio in a passing car, and I stood there breathing it for a long time. In the weeks that followed, Patricia and I had 2 more meetings. The pharmacy board inquiry moved forward. The financial power of attorney inquiry, it turned out, had a paper trail that Derek had not been careful enough about. He had used his own email address for 2 of the communications, which was either arrogant or thoughtless, and either way, it was useful. There was no criminal prosecution. These things are complicated, as Patricia explained, and I was not certain I had the stamina or the desire for a years-long legal process, but the civil record was clear, and Derek's name was in it, and the inquiry had been formally documented. The pharmacist's report was filed and would remain filed. Renee called me once, about 3 weeks after I left. It was a Sunday morning, early, and when I saw her name on my phone, I stood still for a moment before I answered. She didn't apologize. I want to be honest about that. What she said was that she had ended things with Derek, that she was getting the locks changed, that she needed me to know she hadn't. There was a long pause. She hadn't thought it would go as far as it did. She said this in a careful, controlled voice, the voice from the Tuesday night phone call, the voice I associated with her trying not to cry. I said, "I believe that you believe that." Another pause. "Can I bring her to see you?" I thought about my granddaughter. I thought about the school bus stop and the Saturday mornings and the way she had pressed her face into my stomach at the door and said my room smelled like flowers. "Yes," I said. "Bring her on Saturday." I want to be clear about what that yes was and wasn't. It was not forgiveness. Not yet forgiveness is work. And I had only just begun to rest. It was not the restoration of what had been. It was something smaller and more specific. It was a door left open a few inches for an 8-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong and who deserved to know her grandmother. The Saturday visit was quiet. My granddaughter sat at my kitchen table and drew horses in a notebook she'd brought. Long-legged and slightly lopsided, the ears too big. Renee and I drank coffee and talked about ordinary things, the weather turning, a show we'd both seen, the farmer's market that was opening up again now that spring had properly arrived. We did not talk about the folder or the pharmacy report or the recording or Derek. There will be time for that, or there won't be. I have stopped deciding in advance. After they left, I washed the cups and put them away, then sat in the chair by the kitchen window with a book I had been meaning to read for months. The light was good. The street was quiet in the particular way of Saturday afternoons, that loose, unhurried quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. I had a plan I'd been turning over since February, when the apartment first sat empty and I'd stood in the doorway thinking about what to do with all that space. There was a small room off the kitchen that my tenants had used for storage, a bright, south-facing room, the kind of room that grows things. I had called the city's small business development center the previous week and asked some preliminary questions. I had looked up the cost of grow lights and basic potting equipment online. I had walked past the community garden 2 blocks away 3 times and read the posted waiting list for a plot. I was not in a hurry. I had time now, and I intended to use it on my own terms. That evening, I put on my coat and walked to the pharmacy for the Tuesday crossword book I bought every week. The pharmacist, the one who had been careful and unhurried with me, the one who had filed the report, was behind the counter. He recognized me and nodded. I bought the crossword book and a packet of seed packets from the rack by the register. Small ones, the kind for indoor windowsill growing. Basil, chives, one labeled heirloom tomato, container variety. "Spring project?" he asked, nodding at the seeds. "Beginning of one," I said. Walking back, I passed a woman I recognized from the community garden waiting list we had chatted briefly at the board the last time I'd walked by. She was carrying groceries and raised a hand, and I raised one back. And I felt something in my chest that was quiet and ordinary and complete. The drawer in my nightstand still has a lock on it. Not the same one I brought the lock from Renee's house and installed it here, where it belongs. Some nights before I sleep, I rest my hand flat on the nightstand for just a moment. The way you press a hand to the earth to feel that it's solid. What is in that drawer now is straightforward. A notebook, a pen, a photograph of my mother wearing the holly brooch at Christmas the year before she died. Patricia found it in a consignment shop in Renee's neighborhood when she was following up on the power of attorney paperwork. The shop owner remembered who had brought it in. Patricia bought it and mailed it to me without a note, because she is that kind of lawyer and that kind of person. I put it on my mother's coat lapel in the photograph and set the photograph on my dresser where I can see it in the morning. I have learned, in all of this, that protecting yourself is not the same as being hard. That writing things down is not paranoia, it is clarity. That the quiet you build for yourself after a long storm is not the same as the quiet that was imposed on you during it. One is yours. I wake up early now, earlier than I did at Renee's house. I make coffee, I open the kitchen window, and I sit with the sound of my street coming in. On Tuesdays, I walk to the senior center for the watercolor class, which it turns out I am not terrible at. On Saturdays, my granddaughter sometimes comes, and she draws horses at my kitchen table while I water the windowsill plants. And neither of us is required to be anything other than what we are. The basil came up first, thin and green and a little crooked, pushing up through the soil like it had somewhere to be. I stood over it on a Wednesday morning with my coffee and laughed. The real kind. The kind that takes you by surprise. That is what recovery looks like, I think. Not the confrontation, though that mattered. Not the documents or the pharmacist's report or the cease and desist, though those mattered too. It's this. A Wednesday morning. Your own window. A crooked green thing growing in the light. And the understanding, finally quiet and settled in your bones, that the ground beneath you is yours again.